but let's go down to the University of Virginia. We have Professor Jennifer Lawless. She's the chair of the political science department. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to join you.
Okay, big news in Rhode Island. The crowded gubernatorial field got even more crowded as Helena Foulkes, the former president of the retail division of CVS and then later head of Hudson Companies up in Canada, jumped into the race. She's a Rhode Islander, she's got some political lineage. Your thoughts on her entry?
Well, I think her entry makes it easier for every candidate in that when there are more candidates in the race, your win number goes down. You can win with a smaller proportion of the vote. And what that means is that over the course of the next few months, my bet is that each of these campaigns will be identifying as many reliable voters as they can and then working to make sure that they turn out. It no longer becomes one of these situations where you've got to win 40 or 50% of the vote to be victorious in this primary. You have to win 20% plus one, probably, assuming the way that the other candidates are raising votes. The other thing I would note is that I think it probably makes it a little bit easier for a candidate like Seth Magaziner. We know that women are more inclined to have a baseline preference for female candidates, all else equal. And in this case, when all else is equal, they have multiple women from whom to choose, which means that they're going to be dividing the vote, and that makes it easier for the other candidates in the race.
Do any of them, it's a wildly interesting race. I don't think in Rhode Island we've ever had a top-tier race, a Senate, House, or gubernatorial race in which you have 5 people in a primary. The most competitive race I can think back to was the '90 gubernatorial campaign where Joe Palino was mayor of Providence, Frank Flaherty was mayor of Warwick, and Bruce Sunland was running for his 3rd time. Those 3 candidates combined, think about this, in 1990 spent like $9 million. And there was no dark money there. That was real money back then. So the old rule was you kind of hoped your other 2 opponents would fight with each other. In a 5-way race, what's the dynamics?
I think you hope that everybody is fighting with everybody and not you. And so you want to maintain attention. You want people to realize that you're there. But if you can rise above the fray and you've got 3 or 4 other candidates picking at one another, it helps you. By the same token, it also means that there are so many different attacks and questions and different opinions coming from so many different directions that I think you have a little bit more leeway to lob that first attack and not necessarily pay the price for it. So it just kind of throws the race wide open, and it suggests that over the course of the next several months, you're going to see different candidates try different tactics. But my bet is that this is going to be one where almost all of the candidates are on TV pretty early. Almost all of them have the money to do so, and Rhode Islanders are likely going to suffer from quite a bit of gubernatorial race fatigue.
So in a way, people know who they are. They've all won at a statewide level other than Helena Foulkes. In the past, Matt Brown was Secretary of State in the early 2000s. Magaziner, Gorbea, and McKee have won twice back-to-back. But in a weird way, they're under-ticket candidates. They're not household names. They're probably name recognitions, probably, other than Governor McKee, probably around 60%, I'm guessing. So it's a complex series of challenges, especially for a Seth Magaziner and a Nellie Gorbea, isn't it?
It is, but what's interesting about the dynamics of this race is that, again, because there are 5 candidates, all of whom will draw a decent proportion of the vote, I would assume, it means that you can almost run a geographic race. If Nellie Gorbea wants to focus on Providence, if Seth Magaziner wants to focus on Bristol, if Dan McKee wants to focus on North Providence, if somebody wants to focus on South County, if you can really identify voters there and drive up turnout, you can run almost a geographic campaign. And that's not something that we're accustomed to seeing either.
Let's talk about Helena Foulkes. You and I talked about it when GoLocal first broke the story back in August that she was looking to run and was likely to run. And then that came to fruition. You called her potentially a Gina 2.0, and there were some positives to that and some negatives. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, she comes from outside of the political arena. She has business experience. This is not that different than Gina Raimondo when she initially entered politics. Now, she didn't enter running for governor right away, right? She was general treasurer first, but it's sort of a similar background, and their positions, as far as I can tell, look quite the same as well. I actually think it's less of a liability than it might have been at that time, because she's no longer, Gina Raimondo is no longer governor. And so there's been this lapse in time, which means that Foulkes can try and create her own persona. She can write her own narrative. She can communicate to voters, and they're going to be less likely to associate her, I think, with Raimondo than they might have been 6 or 8 months ago.
And, for the most part, maybe the business elite and a few of us in the media know who she is, and a few people on the East Side where she, grew up and went to Lincoln School. But 99% of Rhode Islanders don't know who Helena Foulkes is.
Right. Now, she's in a good position because she has, from what I can tell, an unlimited amount of money to let Rhode Islanders know who she is. But she has to build name recognition, and she has to start building it very quickly. The other candidates, even if we're down to, I think 60% might even be a high number for name recognition. But I would guess that, she's at 10%, if that. And so she has to very, very quickly get herself to the same level as the other candidates who have become, if not household names, then certainly names that people might stop and think, oh, I've heard of that person before.
Does she shake things up because she's got the money advantage and go with a bio campaign, social media and TV to sort of define herself before others define her?
I think she should, if she has the flexibility to do that, and if she has a campaign team that's able to put together, sort of an incredibly well-crafted intro video. There's no downside to doing that. And frankly, if the other candidates this early on respond, it means that they're worried. So she should actually have a little bit of time to introduce herself without the other candidates spending much time hitting back, because they don't want to give her legitimacy. She's not an insider. She hasn't been in the political arena. They're not going to want to start attacking her right away, because that means that they're worried about her and that she's formidable. So, she could take advantage of the next couple of months, build that name recognition, get her story out, and do it almost entirely on her own terms.
Let's leave Rhode Island and head down to Washington, D.C. Joe Biden has had not as chaotic a week as he has had in the past few months. It's kind of a big win this week, right?
It is. Recent polling suggests that his approval rating has crossed back into the 50% range. But I'm not sure if it's a situation where he's had a less chaotic week, or if it's also that Donald Trump has been back front and center in the news, and that has reminded people how chaotic every single day is with Trump at the helm. Now, obviously, the infrastructure bill, the social spending bill, didn't face deadlines over the course of the last week, so there was less attention on that front. But if the Trump subpoena issue wasn't front and center, and if Trump wasn't at rallies and encouraging people either to vote or not vote, depending on, the extent to which their candidates are supporting election fraud, I'm not sure that we would be reviewing the last week for Biden as not so bad. But it's all relative, and this past week has reminded me why so many people were so eager to vote for Joe Biden in the first place. There's an adult at the table, and even if he's not getting everything that he wants, he seems presidential. He is presidential, and every minute that Donald Trump is back in the news helps him.
Donald Trump is in the news. The House Investigative Committee is moving forward. They had subpoenaed some top-level Trump staffers, political consultant Steve Bannon being one of them. He was supposed to appear today. I've not checked, but all reports was that Steve Bannon was not going to adhere to the subpoena. Now the question is, does that go to the Department of Justice? Does Garland push forward as the Secretary of as the Attorney General of the United States and press forward with a stiff action, legal action? What happens there with these subpoenas?
You can compel a subpoena, right? The Justice Department would have to do it, or else
Right.
Steve Bannon would be in contempt. Now, the thing that's a little bit ridiculous about Steve Bannon saying that he doesn't have to appear because his communications with Donald Trump are protected by executive privilege is completely nuts, because he didn't work in the White House. So even if you're willing to grant that maybe there is some executive privilege cloud over some of these communications, and I don't think there is, but that's the argument that they're making, Steve Bannon certainly wouldn't be covered by it. And you've got people like Mark Meadows, who was chief of staff, who are complying with the subpoena. So if anybody was going to be covered, it would be somebody who was actually in the White House working with Trump, having conversations about these issues. I also think that there is pressure on, the Congressional Committee as well as the Justice Department to take very seriously defying a subpoena, because part of what they're arguing in this particular case and part of what they're arguing as the premise of this investigation is that nobody is above the rule of law. And this is a perfect example of how Trump and people in his orbit are trying to demonstrate that they're above the rule of law when investigating the rule of law.
Speaking of Trump, he swiped numerous times in the past week, 10 days at Mitch McConnell. What's the dynamic? What's the win there for Donald Trump? What's the impact for Mitch McConnell?
I don't think that Mitch McConnell is in much jeopardy, although we did see last week that several of his Senate Republican colleagues were upset that he gave the Democrats a win when it came to keeping the government open and raising the debt ceiling. I don't think he's in much electoral trouble here, but I do think that it suggests to a lot of other members of the Senate, a lot of Republicans in Congress, that nobody is immune from Donald Trump's attacks. And, he's willing to primary just about anybody. He's willing to get a candidate out there. And so the kinds of things that Trump has been saying about Mitch McConnell, when McConnell has basically been doing Trump's bidding for the last 5 years, is meant to, I think, scare down ballot candidates, especially those in the House of Representatives.
Speaking of the House of Representatives, there does not seem to be tremendous progress in getting the progressives to take a smaller piece of the proverbial pie and move from their $3.5 billion social spending package down to the more, what appears to be palatable on the Senate side, $2 billion price tag. How does that play out? How can House members, progressive House members, who have been so strident for so long, walk that back?
It's difficult, but the gift that they've been given is a little bit of time. And so I think they can get their ducks in a row. They can begin messaging. They can think about where they can cut. Are they going to cut certain programs? Are they going to cut the length of time that these programs would be in effect? Are they going to slice some of the budget from them? I mean, they have a lot of opportunities, I think, to still make the case that they're getting almost everything that they want. The American people are not going to understand or follow the extent to which, this spending bill would cover 3 versus 5 versus 10 years of spending for a particular program. So I do think that they need to obviously figure out what it is that they want to cut and how they want to do it. But at the end of the day, when they're talking to their constituents and when they're messaging their own successes, I still think they'll be able to say pretty compellingly that they were able to pass a bill that far exceeded anything that anybody would have expected, and that certainly far exceeds anything that would have happened had there not been unified Democratic control in Washington.
And will Bernie Sanders allow them to do that? I mean, Bernie's still talking about, we've already compromised from $6 trillion down to $3.5 trillion. It would be blasphemy if we cut down to $2 trillion.
And I think he's going to continue saying that, except I also think he's much more pragmatic than a lot of people give him credit for. And there is no way that he wants to hand Senate Republicans and Donald Trump a victory. And not passing anything means handing them a victory and basically ensuring unified Republican control, which stymies Sanders' agenda, which stymies any progressive agenda, potentially for a decade.
And then does this Virginia's governor's race, which is now boiling up to being almost a national race, is this a bellwether for both parties?
I mean, I'm here. I see the ads nonstop. I see the campaign.
Let me just ask you, have these ads changed your position?
Yeah, I'm really considering switching sides this time. I think that Virginia is bluer than a lot of people realize based on population hubs. And so the DC suburbs, Charlottesville and Richmond, are enough to win a statewide race. And we've seen that with the governor's races. We've seen that with the U.S. Senate race. But it all comes down to turnout. All of that's predicated on relatively high turnout. And I think that's what it's going to come down to. I don't think that it's a bellwether in terms of overall positions and policies. Trump was not very competitive here statewide. But I do think that there are reasons to expect that Republicans might be fired up and turn out at higher rates. So we'll see. I mean, if I had to bet, I would say that McAuliffe would win. I would also say, unfortunately, that he's not the most exciting, enthusiastic candidate. And so that doesn't really instill a lot of enthusiasm or excitement among Democratic voters. We'll see.
And then last but not least, what's the time frame on the infrastructure bill and the social spending bill? Do we have any idea when these two pieces of legislation move forward, and do they continue to be inexplicably linked? Will the progressives only pass infrastructure if there is a simultaneous or somehow tied together passage of the social spending package?
Oh, I think they're now definitely inextricably linked, because if they weren't, we would have passed infrastructure last week. And that's basically been their main bargaining chip. If they pass infrastructure without the social spending bill, they can kiss their $2 trillion goodbye as well, right? So they've got to do everything they possibly can to get that number up, and holding the infrastructure bill hostage is the way to do it. The fact that they're willing to move away from the 3.5 trillion suggests that there is, a possible passing of these two pieces of legislation inside, two bills in sight. But I can't imagine separating them at this point. I think they probably have until the end of the year. They certainly cannot go beyond the holidays without having these two major successes, because in January, it's the 2022 election cycle, right? So they have about 2 months left where they can continue to iron out these differences. I would assume that by early November or mid-November, we would have a general sense of the date at which time both of these bills will pass. I'm confident that both will pass. And the longer this goes on, the less problematic I think it seems to the American public, because they get bored and they move on to the next story. And so infighting among the Democrats and airing dirty laundry among the Democrats, if it ultimately results in two major spending bills that could trickle down and provide jobs in various districts, I think people are willing to say, all right, it took too long, but they got it done.
And it takes too long if they get into that Christmas break, the debt ceiling fight, which now Mitch McConnell has said he will not agree to another debt ceiling. This is going to get very, very complicated for the White House and for the Democrats in both chambers.
Yeah, they've got to pass it before the debt ceiling vote, but I believe Mitch McConnell, as far as I can throw him on that front. He's not going to single-handedly be responsible for shutting down the government during the holidays amid a pandemic, where probably the numbers of cases of COVID are going to are going to start rising again because people are going to be indoors. So I would call his bluff on that.
All right. What should people be looking for this coming week?
I'd say that the governor's race in Virginia is actually something really to consider. If you look at the rallies that are being staged next week, Barack Obama is coming here, Stacey Abrams is coming, Jill Biden is coming, and you've got Donald Trump calling into various Virginia Republican Party meetings. This is basically going to be a national campaign. And although I don't think it's a bellwether, I think it does. I don't think the outcome will necessarily be a bellwether. I do think it demonstrates the kind of messaging that we're going to see for all of 2022.
I'm just going to pick up on this. The two Senate races that took place after the November election kind of gave the Democrats momentum, right? It gave them, control of the Senate, but it gave them momentum as the leading political party. If the Republicans were to grab the Virginia governorship, knowing that it's become a much more blue state, knowing that it's had a string of Democratic governors, that's got to hurt a little bit for the Democrats.
Oh, it would be a big, big problem for the Democrats, because the Democrats, I think, already feel like they're heading into 2022 with pretty negative prospects. And the only way that they can win is to maintain and defend the ground that they have, plus a couple of pickups. If they lose a place like Virginia right now, I think it takes the wind out of those sails.
As always, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate your insights, both on Washington, D.C. and what's turning into be one of the most interesting 2022 races, the Rhode Island Democratic primary for the governorship here in Rhode Island. Thank you, as always, for everybody else. Stay tuned. Lots going on here in Rhode Island. We'll have updates all afternoon and into the evening. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, don't be Kyrie Irving. Go get vaccinated, pick up your $37 million, and enjoy the NBA season like he should be doing as well. Thanks, everyone.